Hello, welcome to today's Back to the City. I'm Simon Calder, and today I'm joined by Ruby Blue on the cusp. Welcome, Ruby. On the cusp of the release of two things tomorrow at the Hook and Ladder.
Yeah.
There'll be the release party for both the Ruby EP and your first collection of poetry, The Sun, the Moon, the Truth.
Yes.
So there's a lot to cover in this collection of episodes. I thought a good starting point would be the very end of the poetry collection and the very beginning of the record.
Yeah.
Because the poetry collection ends with a poem called "Lately I Collect Men," which is a good poem. And the second half of that poem is, "I find myself drawn to the half men, the no men, that I'll never be your man men. And my heart lives in shadows and whiskey-soaked rebellion from all those years devoted to loving the wrong man. But there are some things I can't run from. The sun, the moon, the melody, the groove, deep vibes, and the truth."
And
So
the truth.
And the truth. The sun, the moon, and the truth.
Yeah.
And so that's how the poetry collection ends. And then the record begins with "Sunshine and Good Looking." Did you forget about the sun as it was rising so bright? Did you forget about that full moon glowing?
Yeah.
And of course, that the sun, the moon, and the truth, as you highlight in the intro, three things. Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth.
Yeah.
Which is, you say, a quote, a paraphrase of a longer passage from the Buddha.
Yeah.
So let's bring all of that into conversation.
Yeah.
The statement from the three things that cannot be long hidden, how the poetry collection ends, and how the record begins.
Yeah.
Do you have any reflections on any of that?
Yeah, you know, I love that you bring in the kind of the string of the sun and the moon, because that's a theme that weaves itself through the whole record and through a lot of the poetry too.
Mm-hmm.
I find a lot of, as many poets have, I'm sure, a lot of inspiration in the sun and the moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just, there's endless inspiration there, and also, you know, even just like sitting outside in a full moon night, you know, just generates so many, I don't know, for me, and again, I'm certain I'm not alone in this, so many like recollections and feelings and just like memories, right? These kind of nostalgic feelings, you know? And I think, you know, especially that first track on the record, "Sunshine and Good Looking," it's very, for me, it's very nostalgic. It's kind of that nostalgic feeling, almost an icky feeling though too, like when you're at the end of a relationship with someone that you initially thought was really great, and then you kind of get to the end of it and you kind of maybe see some true colors and you're like, dang it, you know what I mean? Like I thought they were sunshine and good looking, like, oh my God.
We have that whole journey, even just in the chorus, where "you were sunshine and good looking" is of course the lyric at the beginning of the chorus, and then it ends, with a recognition. It's hard to see how broken we all are and how much we've hurt each other.
Yeah.
So that's contained even just in this one short opening track, you know, to the record.
Yeah.
It introduces a lot of the themes, and I feel that if the sun, the moon, and the truth what can't stay hidden, it is hard to see things. So then it becomes necessary to ask ourselves, have we forgotten about the sun as it was rising?
Yeah.
Did you forget about the full moon glowing?
Yeah.
Because in this instance, like seeing the true colors, seeing how this person is,
Yep.
we would really like
And,
that
you know,
not to be the case.
seeing people turn away from love.
Yes.
And that's kind of what you know, the truth, you know, because that was my question, right, when I finished that poem, "Lately I Collect Men," because that was a poem, that was one of the newer poems, and the book is chronological, so it makes sense. But I specifically wrote that poem to tie into the title of the poetry collection, and also just to reflect kind of like, well, this is where I'm at right now. And but the truth, you know, as I was kind of reading through that, I thought, the truth, what is the truth? I know what I mean, but what do I mean, you know? And it's love, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the sun, the moon, and the truth, love, right? Like, you know, that poem or that song, "Did you forget about the sun as it was shining so bright?" You know, you see people behave in ways that are so hurtful to others, and you just wonder, like, where did people get so lost?
The disconnection.
Where did we lose our connection with, you know, with the sun and the moon and the love and the truth, and like how do people get so lost in their own ego that they lose that?
The sun, the moon, the love, and the truth, and the melody and the groove.
And don't forget about that part.
So that poem is, of course, in the final section, which is Music Years.
Yeah.
And something else that struck me about that final set of poems, this is from Pizza and Guitars.
Yeah.
There's some lines. This is the life I always wanted. My days are easy and evenings filled with music, laughter, love.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a significant feature. That's a significant feature, I think, of this final section.
Yeah.
That there is this sense, okay, that when we choose music, laughter, love, then we experience the melody, the groove, the deep vibes, and the truth, which can serve as a kind of like grounding. It's the closest thing that we desire to a stable grounding force. Because throughout the rest of the poetry collection, I think there's this celebration of course, like growth and evolution, and there's all kinds of things that we could cling to for a semblance of stability.
Yeah.
But it seems that the sun, the moon, the truth, melody, groove, laughter, love, we're finding things that we do feel comfortable kind of feeling the gravitational pull of those particular things. Could you expand a bit more on kind of the paradox of finding consistency, stability in those things, but of course there's also fluidity and evolution and growth in those things?
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of my teenage years and a lot of my 20s, most of my, maybe all of my 20s, engaged in these really tumultuous relationships with men that I felt would bring me some sort of stability or peace or grounding. And ultimately, I found that, well, as a young person, and as all young people, sometimes the choices that I'd made, with the types of men to invest in, it wasn't always the best suited to my well-being. I've had some great boyfriends over the years, I mean, for sure, and some great times. But ultimately, what I've found, and I think what a lot of people find, is that you can't find stability in another person. You can't find stability in these, relationships that ebb and flow. And as soon as you start to believe that you can is when it crumbles and falls apart. And so a lot of, reckoning in my late 20s and now my very early 30s, I just turned 31, but has come to the realization that, that grounding and that stability has to come from within. So what things in my life, give me that, right? Well, music, of course, and poetry, right? They're just things that I've always loved. Mm-hmm. And as an adult, part of getting in touch, I think, with like my inner child and my inner truth, has been making those things a central part of my life, which is a big part of why I'm so excited to put this poetry book out, because I've been writing poetry forever, as it says. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, I was a poet way before I was ever a musician. One of the reasons why I started making music is because I really liked putting my poetry to music.
Yes. And some of your songs, like
Mockingbird.
Mockingbird.
Yes, I love hummingbirds too, though.
That's my one.
I know, that's yours. There's an intersection of birds here. Yeah, I love it.
We thank the sky for the bird song.
Yes, that heals the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Mockingbird is such a song.
It is. Yeah.
You used the word reckoning. You used the word reckoning a moment ago.
Yeah.
And the third section is called Reckoning Years.
Yes.
We have early years, wandering years, reckoning years, love years, menagerie years.
Yeah.
Birds.
Yeah.
And then music years. So we go on a chronological journey through your life.
Yeah.
Are these also poems that were written in those eras?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, many of them. There's one exception to that. At the end of the poetry book, I have the poem. I can't remember the title, but it's it's right at the end, and it talks about somebody's hug chasing away the sadness of tomorrow, and I can't remember what that is. But that particular poem I had actually written while I was reflecting on a breakup, and that partner had actually passed away right around kind of the chronological time. So I took that poem reflecting on the grief of that breakup and put it right where that partner had died, because that poem suddenly came back to me. You know, so there's some flexibility with the like the chronological placement, you know, but really for the most part, yeah, like those poems in the beginning were poems that I'd written, you know, when I was 16, 17, 18. You know, one of the first poems is a poem about me being at a music festival with a boyfriend of mine, you know, and falling in love with him. And then, you know, a couple poems later, it's a poem that I'd written right after an ex-partner of mine had gotten in a terrible motorcycle accident. And his friends didn't think he needed to go to the hospital, so they brought him to my house. But he did need to go to the hospital, and he didn't want to go. That was a whole situation. So, but that poem, I mean, I wrote that, you know, he left, and I finally got him to go, and he was in the hospital for a month with severe head trauma and a fractured skull. It was really severe. And I remember sitting alone in my apartment that I'd shared with him, you know, scrubbing the blood off the floor, stripping the blood-soaked sheets off, and just the whole place just smelled like blood vomit. It was really bad.
So later on, there will be a series of dream poems.
Yes.
Which
I love dream poems.
Yeah, so do I. And the particular
I love them.
yeah, and the particular dream poem that you did your final project on, you highlight in the foreword. Pearl. I love Pearl.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I love that particular
There's not
dream
a lot
poem
of people
too.
that I know that are like, I love that, because it's Old English. It's an Old English poem, and so in order to read it, you have to kind of be able to decode some of that Old English, which I find to be a very fun brain activity.
Is that the Gawain poets?
What's that?
I think that Pearl is accredited to the same poet that wrote Gawain and the Green Knights.
I think so.
What is it about that poet that you were drawn to, and that influences the series of poems and the kind of dream poems within this collection?
Yeah, I think that the Pearl, there's so many things about the Pearl that I loved. Of course, just this dazzling dreamscape that he describes. But what really made me fall in love with that poem was the talk about all the crystals. I love crystal energy. I'm very into metaphysical crystal energy. Some people call me woo-woo, whatever. But, you know, I mean, I've got, you know, I wear crystals all over my body, you know, and if you look at the front of the book, it's a picture of a crystal ball with crystals inside of it. And so I really enjoyed reading the Pearl, and he talks a lot about the crystal beryl, which is similar to ruby in a lot of ways. He also talks, I believe I'm trying to think of what other ones he talks about. Of course, he talks about pearls, right? Because that's the focus of the poem. But there's a lot of sprinkling in there. I think the paper that I did for my senior project for my bachelor's degree was an analysis of crystals and their symbolism in Pearl. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's the crystals. It was the rocks that got me, and I'm just like, oh my God, there's shimmering pieces of beryl and amethyst and pearls, and he really, I'd love to dig out that paper, because I really went through and analyzed every time a crystal showed up, you know, what that crystal was and kind of more about it, and kind of expanded on that, because I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's funny to think. I could be called a lot. I could also be called woo-woo now, but back then I wasn't, and back then I was your professor.
You were my literature professor. Yeah.
Not for this dissertation.
I think I got an A in your class too, didn't I? I hope so.
I suspect so.
I recall. I think I recall.
I remember you doing good work.
Yeah, it was cool, and I was fresh too. I think it was my first semester at the U of M. I just moved to the Twin Cities, and you were one of the first people that I ever met, because I moved to the Twin Cities and immediately, you know, 2 days later started college at the U of M.
Yeah.
And there's Simon.
Well, it's very nice.
My literature professor.
Yeah, it's very nice to be here, because I hadn't been exploring the music scene at that point.
Yeah.
So it's so nice to have been there then, and to be here now, and in the meantime, you have taken this journey where you've kind of owned the fact that you are a poet, and drawn on a lot of your poetry and put it to music, and obviously the Red Eye Ruby project has really kind of come into its own as well. I'm really excited about this release
Me too.
at the Hook and Ladder on Friday.
Yeah.
So the reason why I brought up the dream component is because back in the poem that we were just talking about, I remember thinking you'd never do me wrong.
Yeah.
There is a line, muttering nonsensical dream thoughts.
Yeah.
Did your relationship with dreaming, your sense of the significance of dreaming, and what can be discovered, the possibility of discovering the hidden truth through attending to beyond the conscious mind,
Yeah.
entering this dream realm. Did that shift between the early years
Yeah.
and the love years and menagerie years and music years?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a strengthening of my relationship to dreaming, and there was a lot of reasons for that. One of them actually being a lot of work I did in the Native community.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of years doing Native American language immersion, elementary education. And in that time, I became very acquainted with the ideas and principles around dreaming in the Anishinaabe culture.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I was very immersed in the culture at the time, and it was very easy for me to just, boom, slip right into a lot of those ideas, right? And one of those ideas was the sacredness of dreams. So yeah, my relationship to dreaming and my relationship to my dreams and the way that I pay attention to my dreams really shifted, I think probably when I was about 24,
Mm-hmm.
probably just actually right in the beginning of the love years, if we want to talk about chronologically where that falls. But
Yep.
yeah, that's where the relationship to dreaming really shifted. But going back to the piece where you mentioned where I'm describing that old boyfriend of mine who came home and had this just horrific head trauma. I mean, his skull had been crushed and his brain was swelling, and the only thing that saved him was that his skull was broken apart so in so many places that his brain was able to swell freely.
Wow.
And so he wouldn't go to the hospital. He had a fear of hospitals, didn't want to go. And he was like belligerently like, I'm not going. It was really intense. And I remember at that time sort of in a weird way kind of accessing his dream world because he's walking around the house saying these things that I'd never heard him say before. Saying things like things about my student loans that we'd never discussed, like how are you going to pay those student loans, and like stuff that he was just kind of just these very unconscious thoughts that he'd never discussed. Or
There wasn't the filter.
there was no filter.
Yeah.
Yeah, he also said something like, somebody needs to find me a balloon so that I can vomit in it, stuff like that. And you're like, a balloon? Why would you, like, wait a second. This is, oh God, like something is just not right here. And so kind of seeing that sort of unconscious, and I watched that sort of these unconscious thoughts spilling from him, for weeks after that, because, he was in quite a recovery phase. He had to go in for emergency. Once he finally did fall asleep, I got him to the hospital, and he went in for surgery and was there for about a month. And so witnessing his kind of dream state too, and the way that, you know about Phineas Gage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's kind of a similar thing, thinking about the way that brain injuries and stuff can very much shift our consciousness and shift our, so that was interesting for me as well to kind of see. Also just super tragic, very heavy, but that is another dream state when we have a concussion or a head injury too.
Yeah.
Anybody who's had a concussion can tell you can kind of enter like a very intense dream state.
Strangely,
Yeah.
during the time that I was teaching you, I was
Yeah.
kicked in the head by strangers.
That was brutal for you too. You got like really assaulted.
And then I came in to teach you on crutches.
Oh my God.
I was on crutches from a previous accident, and then on top of that, then I was kicked in the head to the point where at the hospital they were saying that I probably had brain damage.
Traumatic.
That was the catalyst, though, for me of diving into the Twin Cities music scene.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was perhaps like the end of my life.
Yeah.
And I was aware that there was an environment that would be a good environment to explore. So it was so strange that I was teaching you when I had that transformative experience.
Yeah.
And it relates to, so the brain comes up a few times
Yeah.
in the poetry collection. Specifically in the final collection, in the final part, the idea of living with a head full of bad brains, being the doctor diagnoses one with a head full of bad brains. I've just been talking about my brain.
Yeah.
And I find that's something that I really like about this collection of poetry, that there are these moments where we're focusing on the brain, on the body. We'll zoom in on some other moments where the body comes up. And as well, there is this Pearl dream poetry inspired exploration of the dream world. I'm really intrigued about how those two things kind of fit together.
Yeah.
And how the ideas about identity and evolving beyond limiting, past identities, how that all kind of fits in with this awareness of the brain as an organ that plays a role in determining identity, but then also exploring the unconscious and the series of dream poems being a space within which we can access the sun, the moon, the truth, and experience transformation as a result.
Yeah. These deeper connections, intuitive connections to, these very old primordial things that humans have always evolved with, right? The sun and the moon, but also, I talk a lot in the book about even like the spirit world and all these spirits, right? That I've always had this thing where I always dream about spirits. I don't often see them, when I'm awake. In fact, that would be rather terrifying, and I'm glad that I don't. I know some people are able to do that, and I that sounds awful. And but when I'm dreaming, I tend to really dream about spirits a lot and think about them, and they come visit me and stuff. And so it's very interesting. And that's a beautiful thing because it's a dream. And it's got kind of this hazy sort of unreality thing. So what is it? I don't know. We don't know. It's just is. But it's fascinating to think about. Yeah, I think the way that, the brain is a physical organ and the brain is an intuitive organ kind of come together. And I have struggled, and I've been pretty public about this, but I've struggled with PTSD due to some trauma that I had as a teenager. And it was interesting diving into trauma therapy for that because I really felt that I needed to do some trauma therapy, and it really has helped, but it's also been rather brutal. This book reminded me of a lot of things. It's like, oh God. But anyway, but looking at the brain as more of an organ and kind of having more of a logical disconnect, from like the way that my brain has processed certain events in my life. And instead of saying, oh, it was so terrible, it was so awful, it was so emotional, just saying like, well, at the time my brain didn't have the capacity to deal with that, so it did something. And now, you need to go back and undo it, but looking at the brain, I think more of as like a organ that behaves in a predictable way has been helpful for my trauma, for my trauma healing journey, but also being at the same time being very, listening, being open and listening to intuition and finding the balance there, right? Between logically understanding what my brain can do as an organ and then also understanding like as a spiritual person, I still want to be in tune with my intuition. And so kind of balancing those two things.
Yes, as someone who is going for a similar balance.
Yeah.
I love that this poetry collection includes both of those components. So to kind of give examples of all of that at the maintaining faith and cultivating intuition end of the spectrum. In the poem, The Closer I Get to My Own Heart, there we have this firm statement, this assertion regarding that beings of light, not of this earth, guide me, protect me from the deep, dark still of the night. Before bringing in going back to the brain again, let's just pause in this poem, The Closer I Get to My Own Heart, because I think this is the most bold regarding declaring the reality of that. It's explicitly declaring the reality of all of that.
There's been many times in my life, and I'm sure you and almost everybody else in the world can relate to this, that there are times in our life when we feel that we're under threat or that we are being somehow attacked or that we're, like feeling really like, oh my God, like I have to protect myself from something, right? Whether it's like some type of a relationship that has somehow turned really harmful and toxic, or maybe you are dealing with some type of a health problem, or you feel that there's just protection needed, right? And so that poem is, it's really about kind of this sort of spirit world of like, I really like to think about being protected by spirits. And this is something that, again, I talk about my past working in the Native community because there's been a lot of ideas that have just sort of seeped into my awareness because of my proximity to that culture for so many years. And one thing, you know, is these spirit protectors that we think about. And I've had some incredible experiences in my life where I've been very afraid. You know, I've had abusive relationships where I've been under physical danger, and times when I have been incredibly scared for my life and scared for my physical safety and my psychological safety and lots of different crazy things that have happened. And ultimately every time I've somehow been protected from that. And it's been very fascinating to me to consider, you know, like even like, you know, you hear people talk about all the time, like, oh, my guardian angel, you know, stuff like that. I really believe in that stuff. I do, although I don't always believe, I certainly believe in guardian angels, but I also believe in other protectors too. And I think, yeah, sort of part of me feeling that was super real was just this consistency of, you know, oh, this terrible thing is happening again. Oh, well, remember when this other terrible thing happened and I was protected? And just kind of just this repeated pattern that I've been really grateful for, where like I've been afraid and somehow, you know, things have shifted in my favor, and it's been very, very comforting to understand that eventually things do work out, even if we're afraid at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, it's no coincidence that that poem's opening line ends with "everything I thought I knew crumbles."
Yeah.
So in those moments where it feels like everything that is essential to us is falling apart, you have had some experiences where that happens, and then there is a kind of, through that death, there is a rebirth and evolution.
Yeah, evolution. Yeah, almost something better coming out of it, right? A lot of times when our lives crumble, we think, oh my God, you know? But ultimately, a lot of times I find that the universe, the powers that be, whatever you want to call it, right, will kind of take these crazy actions and actually pull you out of situations. And it seems like everything's crumbling, but oftentimes, I found in my own personal experience, and I hope that this is everybody else's experience too, is that you find yourself dropped into a place that's actually better. Yeah, like I had a friend who called me, she was crying, she was super upset. Oh, my landlord doesn't want to renew our lease, and my landlord's getting a divorce, and they need to take the house that we're renting back, and oh my God, now we have to find a new place to live, and I'm so upset. And she was super upset. And then a few months later, she had actually purchased a house in a different neighborhood, and she'd called to tell me how happy she was. Oh, now that I'm in a new neighborhood, I just love my new neighborhood so much, and I just really am so happy that I'm here, and I love my new house that I, you know, own, because she had to purchase after that. And I was kind of thinking, I said to her, do you remember how upset you were when you were getting, you know, kicked out of that house? And I said, do you feel now that this was good? And she's like, no, I really do. You know, it's stuff like that.
Well, that was absolutely the case for me with the upheaval that happened in my life when I happened to be your professor. Like, it didn't seem good at the time.
No, it feels very bad at the time.
So being able to relate to what you're describing and through that experience, I think it's encapsulated in the final poem of part 2, Messy, Messy Magic Morning. The entirety of that poem, two-line poem, is everything's broken, but I earned my dragonfly wings.
Yeah.
And I think that fits with what we're talking about. There are moments in the poetry collection where a character, whether it's someone that's being observed in the poem related to tax season, it's not even tax season. There is a character who is working away and we're observing them, trying to have everything come together, to hold everything together. And then at other moments, you or the protagonist or the primary voice is trying to hold things together. At other moments, we're surrendering and witnessing and experiencing the presence of these dragonfly wings as a result of being willing to kind of let go a bit. How does the collection of poetry kind of navigate different types of letting go and discovering, hitting upon the surrender, where it feels like I'm letting go of what doesn't serve me and I'm experiencing the dragonfly wings, which I know that I have earned through doing this. There are moments like that which feel different from the moments of kind of passivity, where we feel that we are being where there's maybe the risk of kind of being manipulated by someone. There are times when we lose ourselves without the sense of the sun, the moon, the truth, and the music being there. And there are times when we let go of an idea of ourselves and we discover a fuller, newer version of ourselves. And I think that the poetry collection explores both of those types of experience. Do you think it does?
Yeah, I do. I think it does. I think it was really interesting for me to go back into this. In fact, it was very like brutal emotionally to go back and read all these poems, because there's things that I had been repressing that suddenly are coming to the surface. I'm like, whoa. But there's something about poetry, the way it encapsulates feelings, that does that. But to get back to your original question, well, number one, art does that, I think, because you can take a terrible experience and you can write a poem about it, or you can write a song about it, and suddenly, you know, you've just taken this very awful, dark thing and you've transmuted it into something beautiful. And so I really believe that that's the power of art. And I think a lot of me personally, my resilience throughout all the seasons of my life has been coming back to that place of artistry, because it allows me to take the broken pieces and put them together in a way that is really beautiful. Or in the case of times when I've had, you know, really oppressive interpersonal relationships where I've felt like I've been trapped with an abusive partner, or I felt that I've been, you know, coercively controlled by somebody who does not have my best interests in mind. Those are times when I can take those experiences and walk away from them and get myself into a safe place, of course, but then ultimately create something out of that that's just for me.